So I know this is a little outside of the normal content on my channel, but in the interest of dispelling historical falsehoods, I thought I would share some really interesting facts I learned in recent years about Christopher Columbus that most people don't actually know about. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. So with Columbus Day around the corner, I figured I would make this video. Columbus has long been a figure special to Latter-day Saints. Still, I never really cared much. In fact, as I got older, it seemed more and more like he was probably not someone worth any kind of special status due to the things that I was hearing about him. Now, each year around Columbus Day, we are all bombarded with posts and articles about how terrible Columbus was. Over time, I just sort of figured because so many people hated him, he probably was not a man worth venerating. Then I watched a YouTube video that very reasonably presented new facts I had never heard before. I began to be curious if he really was as bad as people made him out to be. So I wanted to find out the details of his story. But I found that most people, even those with strong opinions about him, couldn't actually tell me any of the details of his story. For instance, if you were to go right now to your average Columbus hater and ask for a brief outline of what happened on his third voyage, they probably would just stare at you confused, not realizing that he even went on multiple voyages. I came to realize that most people who talk bad about Columbus don't actually even know his story and are just parroting what they read online or what someone else had told them because it aligns with a particular agenda they may have. Now, in all reality, I realized that I wasn't much better than them. I didn't really know the story. So I looked for the most recent biography on Columbus that I could find based on the latest research a few years ago, and my mind was totally blown. I had no idea what I was getting into. And it launched me into a 2-year-long obsessive research project on this fascinating man and his story. I read 6 books, including multiple biographies and first-hand sources. I read them all at the same time, going through the details of his voyages month by month. First and foremost, what I found is that people are wrong about Columbus. He was not a monster. To give an example of what I mean, let's debunk a few of the myths that are put out there by, so-called journalists from venues like Vox. Vox has a popular article on Columbus that is a case study in the kind of gross dishonesty we see online. For example, the article claims that Columbus kidnapped a Carib woman and gave her to his friend so that he could rape her. However, this account, which is from a disputed source that was not found until nearly 400 years after the events, does not even claim that Columbus authorized any mistreatment of this woman. In fact, if this dubious account is true, the historical context of Columbus continually protecting natives and setting free native women would make it more likely that his friend was given custody of this woman specifically because he trusted his friend more than the others on the crew. Columbus is on record over and over telling his men not to harm native women and would punish men for doing so. Columbus' own diary from the first voyage states, quote, "I have given men orders everywhere to take care not to do the least thing to displease them, and not to take anything from them against their will, so they have paid them for everything. I did not allow anything to be taken, not even the value of a pin." On the first voyage, when Columbus found out that the captain of his other ship had taken peaceful natives as slaves, he was upset and had them returned. He later wrote to the king and queen about this. He said, quote, "When he, the other captain, left here, he took away 4 Indians and 2 girls by force. I have ordered them to be given clothes and taken ashore so that they may go home. Treating them thus can only be to your majesty's benefit. The people must be treated honorably and generously." The next claim in the article says that Columbus' crew mistreated the natives. And this is true. In fact, the number one problem Columbus faced as governor was the issue of him trying to prevent the settlers from harming the natives. It is true that the people like Ojeda did horrible things to the natives. But what they fail to mention in this article is that this was contrary to Columbus's express orders. He had said, quote, "Our men are not to scatter themselves or enter inland, but to stay together, and especially avoid doing injury or using violence to the women, by which they would cause a scandal and set a bad example. Rather, they should strive and watch by their soft and honest speech to gain their goodwill, keeping their friendship and love." Next, the article claims that Columbus enslaved over 1,000 people. But what they don't mention was that Columbus had a policy of only enslaving natives who had either attacked his settlements, so he took them as prisoners of war, or natives who were engaging in cannibalism. Vox does not mention that Columbus's intention was that these hostile or cannibal natives were to be taken back to Spain and reformed, and be set free upon a Christian baptism. He also hoped that after learning the language, these natives would be able to become interpreters and assist in future exploration. Those who think Columbus was after slaves are wrong. Columbus, in essentially all the primary documents, is obsessed with baptizing the natives. And at that time in Spain, it was illegal for a baptized person to be a slave. Lawrence Bergreen's book that they use as the source for the Vox article, and this biography is one that I read, even explains this. Bergreen wrote, quote, "Columbus' master plan consisted of baptizing every Indian in the major towns and hamlets of Hispaniola, so they could serve their highnesses like the vassals in Castile. In other words, he wanted the natives to enjoy the same legal status as any other average citizen living in feudal Spain." Now, the article does point to what I believe was Columbus's biggest mistake, though they dishonestly exaggerated. During his second voyage, and after a large-scale attack by the natives in the spring of 1495, Columbus did require a tribute from the natives. It was a type of tax and a standard practice in the feudal age for people taken over by groups like the Spanish Empire. It also would have been expected by the King and Queen of Spain, who required Columbus to bring back gold to Spain. However, Columbus made a fatal mistake. Columbus assumed that there was abundant gold in the land, and so he expected the natives to pay an insanely high tax in gold. By late 1495, he realized his mistake and lowered the tax and allowed it to be paid in goods like fabric rather than gold. However, during the months of this extremely high gold tax, the natives spent nearly all their time looking for gold instead of tending to crops, and a large famine broke out. During the second voyage, a combination of new diseases spread like wildfire around the island and decimated native populations. These illnesses, then coupled with a bad harvest, made conditions for the natives horrible throughout late in the year of 1495. Tales from people who were on the island at this time tell of natives who did commit suicide under these conditions. However, the article dishonestly claims that 50,000 people committed suicide. Yet they never explain why that number is justified in being used. Experts nearly unanimously agree that disease was the primary killer of native peoples in the Americas from the time of Columbus onward. This was a tragedy, and while the 1495 high gold tax was a major mistake, this was not some plot to exterminate natives. The article also claims Columbus was terrible to the Spanish under his rule. Unfortunately, what they don't mention is that nearly all the complaints against Columbus by Spaniards under his rule were complaints about him disciplining Spaniards for harming the natives. Also, nearly all the complaints against Columbus come from a report given by a Spanish official named Francisco de Bobadilla. He, along with other Spaniards in the summer and fall of 1500, were trying to convince the king and queen to replace Columbus because Columbus would not let them do whatever they wanted to the natives. The article also implies that Columbus was involved in selling 9 and 10-year-old girls into sexual slavery. First, the letter they reference is a letter from Columbus complaining to the Queen's friend about the barbarism of the Spaniards he was trying to stop from harming the natives. And if you look at the original letter, rather than their selective translation of it, it's clear that it was not even referring to the ages of the girls, but the number of women that were typically being sold by the Spaniards. Columbus was literally speaking out against the sexual exploitation of native women and people, and Vox dishonestly makes it appear like Columbus was some kind of child sex trafficker. They also fail to mention that on his fourth voyage, it was Columbus who was shocked to meet a native chief who offered Columbus 2 young girls for sex. One of them was only 8 years old. Columbus declined the offer, but he did feed the girls and give them clothing, and then return them to their tribe. Anyway, I could go on and on. If you want to see more, I will link in the video description a ton of information debunking Columbus lies. But I would suggest that before doing that, you listen to the next 2 episodes. In them, I lay out the entire incredible story of Columbus's 4 voyages, based on the details from nearly 2 years of research. Don't be one of those people who has an opinion on Columbus without knowing his story. The reality is that the Columbus story is so much more interesting than most realize. It's filled with courage and warfare and danger and adventure and politics and religion and just about every crazy intrigue you can imagine, including being marooned on an island for a year. It really is the ultimate sailor adventure story. Columbus is not the monster people make him out to be. He may have been a flawed human being, but don't listen to these lies. Anyway, I hope to see you in the next episode as we explore the real story of Christopher Columbus.